Hello folks, and welcome back to part 2 of Beethoven's Secret Life, or The Secrets of Beethoven. Beethoven has a lot of secrets, you know these documentaries they do on Jack the Ripper, and there's all these theories about who was Jack. Was he a royal, mad, insane son? Was he a dock worker who had some crude butchery skills? Was he Francis Tomboilte, I think it's Tomboilte, from USA, who used to carry fetuses in jars and who came to London? So who was he, So everybody's always intrigued to find out who was this mystery person. Well, here's the next secret you may not be aware of. Beethoven, contrary to what you read, you would think he was an anchorite, a hermit, somebody that shied away from society. And he was, in a certain sense. But the way that it's put about was that he never had any success with women at all and never married. And to me, that's a kind of misrepresentation of what the man really was. Because Beethoven had a string of women who fell for him. If you read some of the descriptions, some of them say he was small and stocky, he was dark, he was swarthy, he had a pockmarked face, he was pretty ugly. But when you look at the various portraits, I would say 8, maybe not 9, but 8 out of 10 show the guy as a pretty handsome young lad. He always reminds me of my national bard, Robert Burns, in the face. The two of them are very similar. And he's anything but ugly looking in these portraits. So, anyway, let's get back to the fact that he was, I don't say he was a raving womanizer, but he certainly had his fair share of women, and I dare say that he had his way with certain women, although he wasn't in the league of Casanova or Don Juan. Being a musician, being a composer, that gave him a certain kind of cachet of mystery and, excitement for some of the young women round about. And it's well known that he had lots of women, although, as I say, a lot of these fuddy-duddy writers of yore tend to kind of put the guy down as some kind of misogynistic hermit, who would never go near a woman. That's strictly not true at all, because there were various women in his life, and he fell for quite a few, not just the one. Some of them he fell harder, others not so hard. There was one, now this is where the contentious Jack the Ripper type thing comes in. He wrote a series of 10 short notes, kind of short letters if you like, to his eternal or / immortal beloved, right? And they're the usual kind of smushy, kind of romantic type letters that people would have written then, because in those days everything was always said in a very flowery fashion, whereas nowadays we cut out all the extraneous words and stuff and just get straight to the point. But in those days it was the fashion to embellish emotionally in letters. I dare say that had a lot to do with the poetry that maybe people read in those days. But however, this person was never ever mentioned in the letters, right? And of course that set the critics' teeth on edge, because they were determined to don the Sherlock Holmes cap and get out there and find out who was this immortal beloved, right? Now, there were quite a few women, as stated, and I want to tell you who they were. One of them who seems a likely candidate, was a woman that he fell madly in love with. And she had married, I think, a duke, and he died. And, in her letters, her sister, I think there's two women involved here. There's her and her sister, because in one of her sister's letters, she says, and I quote, "Why did she marry this count, if you like? Why did she marry him and not marry Beethoven?" And she calls Beethoven a beautiful mind. Now, that tells you then that this woman had something special for Beethoven. It wasn't just a case of, well, I kind of barely know him. This sounds more like an affair, knowing somebody personally and intimately, doesn't it? That's what it sounds like to me. So this woman talks about Beethoven in a very personal and physical way. And this was why a lot of these early writers were trying to pin the tail on the donkey for every woman that came along and say, she's the immortal beloved. But as I said, guys, it's not as easy as just saying, right, it was Mrs. So-and-so or Lady this or Countess that, So there were about, I think, 5 or 6 different women that could have fallen into this immortal beloved kind of bracket, if you like. However, there was a period of speculation, as I say, going on, and there was a woman called Josephine. This was the woman I told you, she was widowed. She had married this count, that's what it was. And umpteen writers, all these writers were all basically doing their own investigations. And writers, if Joe Blogg said this, then I'll say that. They never agree on anything. They've all got their own theories because they all want to make their own theories the big thing. But however, it's all about dates and letters, right? Now, there's a guy called Tellenbach, basically, and he suggested a Josephine Brunswick, right? That she was the immortal beloved. And yet, there was another woman, an Italian, okay, and she was Giulietta Guicciardi. And one of even Schindler himself, actually, one of the biographers in Schindler himself said that she was the immortal beloved. But again, it seems to be that trying to uncover who this immortal beloved is like peeling an onion. There's so many layers of intrigue and mystery. Now, Beethoven had a nephew, Carl, right? Belonging to his brother Caspar. Well, that's another thing. Let's just take a little rain check on that for the moment and we'll come back to it. There is talk that perhaps Carl, the young Carl, his nephew, was Beethoven's immortal beloved. And that's fine until you start looking at the letters that he wrote and you say, well, an uncle wouldn't write to his nephew in such romantic terms. He might write about his nephew in glowing references and say, you're a fine, upstanding young man and you'll do well one day and I'm proud of you and blah, blah. But not in the kind of prosaic, rosy, kind of romantic stuff that was in these letters. So it can't have been Carl. However, let's just digress for a moment while we try and unravel the mystery of who was Beethoven's immortal beloved. Carl was the son of Caspar, one of Beethoven's surviving brothers. There were 5, I think, apart from Beethoven, and there was only 2 brothers survived because, as you know, infant mortality in those days was very, very high, and large families perished and only 1 or 2 survived. So there was 3 brothers. There was Beethoven and his 2 other brothers. One of them, the youngest, was Caspar. And he had a son to a woman, and that was Karl, right, who was Beethoven's nephew. And when Caspar died, Beethoven took charge legally as Karl's guardian, if you like, against the wishes of the biological mother, right? Now, if you've happened to see the movie Immortal Beloved, which stars Gary Oldman as Beethoven, like the Amadeus movie, there's some speculation and possibly a bit of poetic license in the movie, but it does make sense. When Caspar comes to his older brother to ask for his approval for marriage to this particular woman, Beethoven in the movie leaves her without a name. He calls her for everything. And he basically says, you are not marrying that whore. She's beneath you. You can do better. Blah, blah, blah. But it turns out in the movie that they're inferring that Beethoven and she actually slept together and that Karl was the result of that he was actually Beethoven's offspring, Beethoven's real son, right? Because in the movie, Karl had only been with her a couple of days and he said she is with child, right? And that would point back to 9 months ago. And they're saying that would be around the time that Beethoven would have slept with her. So they reckon that the woman that Beethoven slept with, which is Caspar's wife, was indeed the immortal beloved, right? But again, so many writers and critics have poo-pooed that fact and come up with their own varieties of the immortal beloved. But let's get back to Karl. I do think there's something in that's possible that Beethoven did father a son to that woman, and that the younger brother, who was very much under Beethoven's thumb and basically did whatever Beethoven said, because Beethoven had to bring them up as a young man when the father died. You know, he had basically to take all the fatherly duties on his tender shoulders at that age. So they kind of looked on him maybe as an older brother / father. So they tended to do what he asked. And in those days, you had to seek blessings from senior members of the family, and it was all very strict and formal and stuff. So the thing is, it could be very well that Karl was Beethoven's son to this woman. And this woman we're talking about was Josephine, right? Now, here's a thing that the sister said as well. She said, why, right, did my sister marry this man, this count, because she would have been happier with Beethoven. Now, this woman's sister is called Therese, right? And she kept diaries, and you know that diaries can give you insights into a person's mind and what's going on in their life. And interestingly enough, she says that Beethoven was in love with her sister, and although he did tend towards her, if you like, but he was in love with the other sister. And what's lastly is that this Josephine, right, she also had a daughter, Minona, and she was born exactly 9 months after the encounter with Beethoven and her husband